Romans 7 paying taxes to those who owe taxes, tolls to those you owe tolls, respect to those you owe respect, and honor to those you owe honor. Do not owe anyone anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law, the commandments. Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not covet. And any other commandment are all summed up by this commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law. Here, St. Paul is explaining how Christians should relate to the law and political order of the land. Joe Dea, how can this command to love one another help inform us and how we should participate in our own political situation today?
I think baked into having a conversation about love and neighbors and political order and things like that, I think a lot could be said, but it kind of boils down to a fundamental understanding of recognizing the person first, and then whatever the topic of conversation or the stance or what have you second, because then if we can prioritize the individual first, it becomes a lot easier to act and react out of a place of love or compassion or consideration or something along those lines, rather than launching into a specific consideration on where you are or what you believe or those kinds of things.
Hey guys, you know that music. It's time again for a round table discussion. I couldn't be more excited. This is a big one, especially for this year, especially since for us recording, this is before the first presidential debate in America. For those listening, this is right after the first presidential debate in America. We don't know what's going to happen. We're not going to talk about that, but we are going to talk about whether the church should try to be nonpartisan and avoid politics, or should the church be bipartisan and kind of play both sides? What should the church's stance be concerning politics? I'm one of your co-hosts, Joshua Noel, again without your other co-host. Work's been rough for him. Pray for TJ. That's all I can say. His God moment is he's thankful for your prayers. And today, it's a smaller roundtable. I don't know if you guys know, but we never guarantee largeness with your roundtables. Just roundness. That's it. So imagine a small dinner table, and that's where we're at. We got me, Joshua Noel. You have Joe Dea of the BuddyWalk with Jesus. BuddyWalk with Jesus. That's right. What's going on with my head? Podcast. You have Nathan Gilmore, the Christian Humanist Profile podcast. Joe's also like a pastor of like home churches and like a million other things. And Nathan's also like a teacher and a million other things. And I can't introduce them fully because that would be its own podcast. So instead, guys, welcome to the show. I'm excited to talk about this topic with you guys. And now I'm going to struggle through doing TJ's parts. And that's going to be not pretty. So first, I've got to plug something. It doesn't say what. I'm going to go with Discord. I think TJ wants people in that Discord. There's like no one there now. But if you guys go over there and talk to us, we'll talk to you. And if you ask us important questions, we'll ask important people and get you their answers to the questions, because our answers don't matter. Also, you can check out other shows in the Anazal Ministry Podcast Network. We have plenty. Christian Ashley has 2 right now. He's doing the Let Nothing Move You, where he's going through the Bible one at a time. He also has Why I Don't Like, where he's talking about IPs he doesn't like and explaining why he doesn't like them instead of just being like, this sucks. See, I Do Dummy for Theology. You also could hear the foul-mouthed preacher going through Psalms in the Bible After Hours. So that's always fun. So check some of those out if you want, or check some of the other shows out. There's plenty of shows on the network. But for now, we have to dive into the sacred act, the sacrament on our show of complete unity, which is silliness, because you can't be divided when you're as silly as I am about to be. Today's question, silly question. If you had to choose never to get to, man, I really wanted TJ to answer this. I'm going to text him later. If you had to choose to never get to use any herb or spice ever again, which would you choose? So you can either choose to never get to have herbs again or never have spices again. Whatever you choose, you'll still get salt and pepper. Those aren't affected by this particular choice because they don't count. That's just white people spice. So I'll go first. As difficult as this is, so there's some spices I really love. You think like cayenne pepper, paprika. There's a lot of stuff for cumin. But at the end of the day, my love for cilantro, for oregano, parsley, mint. Nah, that wins out. I'm getting rid of spices. I hate it, but if I have to choose, I'm going to deprive myself of spices in favor of herbs. Joe, if you had to choose one, what are you getting rid of? Herbs or spices?
100% spices. I could do, and yes, I'm cheating being over a decade as a chef, but you can do anything with herbs that you could do with spices. It just takes a little bit more time, except for parsley. You mentioned parsley. You might as well put a blade of grass on your plate if you use parsley. That's all I'm saying. Anyway,
I like fresh parsley. Fun fact: when I worked at Domino's and I had my accident and I was like not able to function for like a year, just to give you a hint of how much I like oregano, they sent me an entire one of their shipments of oregano that the store gets just to my house. Said you probably need this while you're put up. I did use it all, so I guess I needed it. Nathan, you're getting rid of herbs or spices? Where are you going?
Given the choice between the two, I'm keeping herbs and getting rid of spices. Kind of like what you guys said. I mean, herbs really kind of constitute a dish, whereas spices, are kind of a side show. So there's just too many things that I enjoy that have herbs in them that I don't think I'd be able to get rid of those.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I mean it's still challenging for me, just because you guys know Thanksgiving's my favorite meal. I don't really put a lot of herbs on my turkey. It's mostly like cinnamon, cumin. I don't want to give away all the secrets, but it is mostly spices. Maybe a little bit of rum. I cannot confirm.
Cinnamon and rum. Okay, so that's a conversation at some point in our lives we need to have.
The cinnamon is very minimum, where you can't really taste it, but it does bring out some of the other flavors. It's more spice than sweet, but another day. For now, we'll talk about more important things, like the things you're supposed to talk about when you're at a Thanksgiving meal: religion and politics. So today, this is going to be a weird one. Usually I tell you if we're mostly going to be talking about capital C church or lower C case church. Since we're talking about the topic we're talking about, we're probably going to be about half and half. So we're going to do our best when we're talking about the church as a whole, like every single person who's a Christian, to say capital C church or let we mean the church. We'll say the word the or something. We'll try to distinguish. And when we're not making that distinguishment, we're probably talking about local churches where you meet congregationally together, whether at a house or church building, something like that. Mm-hmm. So we'll try to make those distinctions of the capital C and lowercase c churches, but hang in there with us if we forget. So first up, Nathan Gilmore. You're listed by name on this outline. I'm glad you showed up. You often bring up how concerned you are that Americans continue to participate in a form of syncretism where we conflate our political ideologies with our faith. Would you care to speak why this topic is so important to you and you keep bringing it up?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when I have a bone, I don't turn loose of it. I've got some bulldog in me that way. But this one is especially important to me because in the last, I'm going to say 10 or 12 years, I'm going to give that broad time frame. I have noticed more and more frequently and more intensely that, especially in online spaces, but that online culture is starting to infiltrate local worship gatherings. There's been a sense that there are certain worship gatherings you can't be a part of because of your partisan affiliation. And I don't mean that the worship gatherings are keeping people out. I'm talking about people won't set foot in certain places because they violate this or that platform of, whichever party is calling the shots. And, the main reason that this concerns me is that, theologically, one of my priorities And this goes, when I'm writing theology, when I'm preaching sermons, when I am teaching in a church, really anytime that I'm dealing with fellow believers, one of my chief priorities is making sure that Christ remains ultimate. And when a political party says you cannot affiliate with this or that gathering of believers because to do so is not loyal to us, and usually the vocabulary doesn't run that direction, but when you analyze it, when you press on the question, a lot of times it goes that direction. When that happens, then Christ is no longer the ultimate authority. The party is ultimate. Christ is secondary. Sometimes Christ becomes sort of a celebrity endorsement for the party. Sometimes, Christ becomes someone who needs to be protected by the party, which is especially troubling. But, the reason that I keep hammering at it, I'll put it that way, is precisely because of the ultimacy of Christ.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious here. Man, this is why we need TJ, because he keeps me from getting off the rails. But here we go. We're going off the rails. I am kind of curious when you talk about this, if you really just mean Republicans. So just to provide context for those.
No, not by
no.
any
give
means.
me a minute though. Because
sorry, Josh, go ahead.
It is difficult here. So I'm trying to find the right words here. Well, first off, so let's say we are all Americans. So we are primarily talking to Americans. That's most of our audience. I know some are not. In America, we're mostly a two-party system, Republicans and Democrats. And in my personal experience, usually it's Republicans who are saying, God likes our party. He hates the other party because they want to murder babies. And in my experience, the other party, the most I really hear religious-wise is more of well, actually, our president is Christian, or actually this. And it seems like the Republicans are more offensively using God on the offense of, see, Jesus likes us. And the Democrats seem to be using more defensively, like, actually, we still love Jesus. And that's just been my experience. So you're saying no, though. You've seen it kind of used differently than what I typically experience.
Yeah. And I want to hear what Joe has to say about this, because Joe definitely and visually reacted to that. I've especially seen it in online spaces, but I have also in conversations, especially with former college students, heard story after story about, I will not go to my parents' church anymore because, and what follows because is something that I could usually find in the DNC platform. So, it's not necessarily coming from the pulpit as often. I recognize, as an elder at a mainline Protestant church, that, mainline clergy tend to be very careful about those things. But when we're talking about especially online spaces, but also in terms of autobiography, it seems like the parties, plural, both of them, are making claims on the souls of Americans that only Christ should be making. But Joe.
So, and Nathan, just so you know, the last, 3 seconds or so of what you said got cut off, at least for me. So I would poke a little bit at the time frame. And here's what I mean. You had said about the last 10, 12 years, and specifically you qualified the statement within the online space. And to that, I say absolutely. That if we're speaking about how the online space has cultivated a new dimension of having a platform to espouse your political and extracurricular opinions, yeah, absolutely. And about how that has had a ripple effect and all of those kinds of things. As somebody who is closer to the age bracket that you're referencing, a little older than the age bracket that you're referencing, but my generation was very much the byproduct of being a teenager when 9/11 happened crowd. That was like every generation has their big monumentous, like this has shaped the culture for within my generation. And for us, it was the 1-2 punch of Columbine and 9/11. that really informed a lot within societal norms, within the way that we treat other people, within how we interact with each other, and absolutely has bared an impact on how we process theology and how we process unity and all of what that means. The issue becomes when we consider all of the ripple effects that 9/11 happening had on the theological structure of the of what was largely considered within churches. And even somebody young or somebody older than me would then say, well, actually, and then point to something before 9/11. Absolutely. But like, that's for within the last 20-ish years, that was something that a lot of the ripple effects that are being felt within the last 10 years go back another 10 years and have the fingerprints of it becoming a platform for conservative, solid values and all of those kinds of things. And I'm using those words hyperbolically. I'm using those words tongue in cheek because that's generally how it's described and all of those kinds of things. Now, where my experience veers off from Josh's experience is kind of within that same bracket of being within that realm of what it meant for our generation turning 18. And if you were a part of mainline Christianity within the West, it meant you voted a certain kind of way, you had a certain morality structure, you had a certain view on certain things from one side of the fence. The other side of the fence is all of those people are the problem. And it's a bunch of people going like this and just pointing at each other, generally in a circular argument. And so it's not so much of at least, but I've heard some of well, actually, we're not godless heathens from people that would be considered more progressive or left-leaning or whatever, liberal, whatever words you want to throw in there. It's more of these people are psychotic conservatives that just want to, sacrifice people for $1 sort of thing. Just like conservatives are looking at liberals and saying, these people just want to sacrifice their children to Moloch or whatever. You know what I mean? And like that kind of back and forth of mudslinging from both sides. And like Nathan said, both of them staking claims on souls of people and essentially building the same paradigm and using that paradigm to harbor whatever they believe in, sticking the ammunition holes with their version of ammunition and literally playing the same playbook, just saying two different scripts, but essentially they're the same script, just talking about the other person.
So backtracking,
right, and just to clarify a little bit, I grant what Joe said, and I mean, I think that he's absolutely right. That the dynamic
what he was explaining is more of a kind of like a direct indirect kind of comparison. It's kind of because I have seen what you're talking about as far as like a lot of people, I say a little younger than my age usually, who won't go to that kind of church because they're the radicals, like what Joe was talking about, who hate gay people or want genocide or whatever straw man argument they want to plug in there. And I guess for me, though, that has always felt more like people outside the church not wanting to come to church because of politics. Whereas the other side, it's usually from the pulpit, from the church, someone saying, no, you cannot vote this way because they hate babies. They want to kill things. And like, it's a lot more explicit. Like they invoke God in the statement. Whereas the other side, usually it's, I don't want to go to that church because they hate gay people. And God isn't like the first word they mention. So I guess it just, for me, I don't make that connection as quickly.
Right. And I mean, just to clarify, I mean, Joe's right that this dynamic was present in the decades before I'm going to place it somewhere in the middle of the Obama administration, but it was during Obama's second term really that I started to notice not just a dynamic of us versus them. That's been there a long time. Okay. But more, I guess it was an intensification of explicit calls to say, you should not affiliate with that church. Right. So, I mean, events that come to mind are things like Glenn Beck saying that if your church professes social justice, leave that church. Or, the hashtag Leave Loud movement that says, if the church's politics are not explicitly enough anti-racist, leave that church. Or, once Trump became president, of course, all of it got turned up to 11 because so many things got turned up to 11 in January 2017. But then it became, not just I won't go to that church because this or that, but you should not go to that church because this or that. Does that make some more sense of it, or is it still sounding vague?
Yeah.
No, I agree with all that. I think the thing that's interesting too, since you mentioned Trump, I feel like, and this is one just because like when I grew up, it's hard for me to pinpoint it because I was so young at the time. Just kind of looking at it and realizing there was a point where it kind of felt like it was mostly the extremes on both sides that wouldn't associate, but your normal people were like fine. And specifically, I'm even thinking of like your smart people because like George W. Bush loves Michelle Obama. They get along. They have great times. You look at their photo ops and it's like, wow, those are two people who disagree having a wonderful time. And then all of a sudden, our situation now, I don't think there's a single person on the world that wouldn't like stop and crap their pants if Donald Trump and Biden's wife had a photo op together. Like everybody, like no one expects that kind of stuff with what's happening now. And that's not even a generation ago. Like that's like you said, like 12 years ago, maybe. Like that's just weird.
I'm not sure I would put that pin in a culture conversation. I would put that pin in the players involved, and by proxy, or not by proxy, by effect of the players involved, the crowds that they draw tending more towards that side of I'm going to disregard you as an individual if you follow this person, because if you follow this person, it means A, B, C, D, and through to Z. So to Nathan, back to Nathan's point, part of what you're describing is what I needed to play catch up on when I hit the scene, had my come to Jesus moment, and then saw the world collectively drop on its head in 2020, and especially Western Christianity. I said what I said. And I watched a systematic dropping of the ball at a widespread level. Again, I said what I said. When people like me hit the scene and started talking about, well, hang on. What about the whole love thy neighbor thing? What about the whole law and prophets being summed up into love God, love others? What about all that? What about what does it mean to actually care for individuals? Oh, well, you've got a social justice gospel. See, I grew up for a long time, because I grew up in a hyper-conservative family. I really wanted to believe in this whole Jesus thing. I really wanted to. So I did the youth group thing, and I did all that. And then I got a divorce, and life did what it did. And I'm like, I realized that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't actually believe in this, and thus I'm not going to expose myself to these Christians anymore. And so I walked away, came back, had my come to Jesus moment several years later. I am literally that generation where you talk about this generation that we need to war against deconstructionism. I am a product of that. That is my generation. But when I come back and I'm hearing, oh, you care too much about people, you just have a social justice gospel. Bro, I posted something without actually stating a stance. I posted a thing that if you look at it and you ask 0 questions, then I'm affirming. Oh my Lanta, the amount of backlash I watched as my friends list dwindled. I had people separate from the ministry and the whole 9 yards without asking me a single question about anything that went into that post. And so, and again, hearing that phrase, social justice gospel. So absolutely, I came in after that period of time that you're talking about, and tried to put the pieces together on the timeline for what it seemed like mainline Christianity did during that time, which is just weird. It's just a weird timeline with the but I'm not, but again, I think it all kind of built upon itself when you look through the lens of antiquity over the last 20 years, and to see what that curve looks like. It almost seems like it's a fitting swing. But again, I would say part of the issue that's at play when discussing all of this, and yes, we live in the West, and thus we need to put things in terms, in honestly reduced terms, of the 2-party system, and that being 2 players is open to, well, these people are the villain, these people are the hero. Your mileage may vary on who the villain and who the hero is, but whatever the one of those virtues you vibe with, well, that's probably going to dictate who you think the hero of the story is and who you think the villain of the story is. But when we look at the grand landscape, as somebody who's in this conversation, that I have gone out of my way, I used to be, if you would have even had this conversation with me a year ago, I would have been like, get that crap out of the church. It has no place. Shut up about politics. You are wasting your time. Your vote doesn't even matter. Those would be my main talking points. Spoilers, they're not anymore. But being somebody who has been very, very purposeful about separating themselves from the rhetoric and from the garbage and from the noise that every single political conversation tends to generate, it's the same soup, different bowl. It's the same playbook. It just depends on who is writing the story at that particular time, because every single person's story has a victor, has a hero, has a conquering moral authority, where the other one doesn't. I'm painting in broad strokes, but generally, more often than not, that tends to be where the conversation goes. And before we even talk about whether or not it should be spoken from the pulpit, because I'm with Nathan, I think people have gotten clever. I think people have understood that you're going to piss people off if you get in front of your pulpit and say, God bless America, everybody who doesn't vote right is terrible. No, they're going to use a podcast. They're going to use a YouTube channel. They're going to use an Instagram account. They're going to use a Facebook account. They're going to use something extracurricular to the pulpit to still be able to generate their opinion out for the masses. So I'll get out of the pulpit now.
A couple things. First, not serious at all thing. Joe, am I seeing a TARDIS in a Jesus baby manger kind of situation?
100%. That is this. Okay. That is the situation. To
that's
my
what
left.
I saw. Okay.
Yeah.
On a more serious follow up to that is, I know we got to move on, but I'm gonna break open a can of worms and then let Nathan talk. So I don't want to be the podcast that says, hey, here's the problem. Everyone's polarized around politics, and then say the answer is love Jesus and we'll move forward in unity. Because I don't think it's that simple. And I'm just going to speak from the heart here, and I'm sorry for whoever gets offended who will be offended. For me, looking at it, I don't love either candidate in America right now. But if I'm looking at them, I have no problem, and I don't feel like I'm being dishonest at all, saying Donald Trump is an evil person. I just think that he is evil. I don't think I can say that about Joe Biden for me personally. Like, just looking at it, I'm like, I might disagree with the man. I don't think of him as evil. So it is hard a little bit because, like, it's frustrating people do, oh, the both sides, like, both sides have a point. And I'm like, okay, but one man is actively cheating on his wife, lying about the gospel and breaking the law, and the other one isn't doing those things, you know? And on top of that, I do kind of think that there's a little bit of a point. Like, if I'm looking for a church, just speaking honestly about myself personally, I'm doing a little bit of research. If I'm like just moved and I'm looking for a new church to go to, and it's like, well, here's one that believes in social justice, and here's one that believes, hey, everything Republicans do is right. Here's one that is, you know, going to be loving towards LGBT community, and here's one that's going to every Sunday say that fags are going to hell, whatever phrase they want to use. Yeah, there's one that I'm more likely to go to. Like, and I don't think I'm wrong for that. But that's definitely a political decision on my side where I've decided I don't want to go to a church of certain politics, and I do want to go to one that agrees with me a little bit more. Nathan, how would you address the can of worms that I just opened up?
Sure. First of all, and I'm going to incorporate some of the things that Joe was talking about as well when I'm answering you, Josh, because Joe raises some good points. And I just want to note that what makes this terrifying is not that it is unprecedented, but that church history, if you read some church history, has plenty of examples of this sort of thing, right? And just to pick an obvious one, 400 years ago, during the 30 Years' War, you had the boiling over of, what we call Protestant Reformations, and I always plural, it's several movements going on. There's not one single thing called Protestantism that gets co-opted by the crowns, so that you have Catholics killing Catholics in the name of the King of France. You've got Protestants killing Protestants in the name of the Habsburg Empire. Over in Britain, you've got this settlement, where as long as you are loyal to the crown, you kill whoever the crown is to. And, in that moment, the priority of the crown over the church, in a very straightforward historical sense, becomes murderous in its intensity. So, we have not by any means, gotten to the worst that we can get. Now, Josh, to address your question, once again, that dynamic you're describing, I just often refer to it as the big sort, and it has been going on for decades, right? So, people who are college educated, people who are more progressive in their politics, people who, even have certain church affiliations tend to move to the same places, attend the same churches, send their kids to the same schools, engage in the same social organizations, all these sorts of things, right? I think that, again, that dynamic, although I have my criticisms of it, one thing that a professor of mine said 25 years ago that has stuck with me ever since is that he tries never to go to a church at which he is completely comfortable. And that's something that's always stuck with me, that, it might not be everybody's calling, but I have a sense that it is my calling always to be a little bit of an outsider wherever I'm worshiping, right? Simply because I can raise certain questions as an outsider that, someone who is completely of the place wouldn't necessarily be able to raise. Now, do people, attend churches, where they're not being actively chased out? Yes, absolutely. Okay. Again, I'm an elder at a mainline Protestant church. There's a reason that, I don't attend the churches that ran me out. The main one is they ran me out, but, they ran me out because I was raising questions they found uncomfortable. So far, the mainline Protestant church where I attend, finds me interesting enough that they haven't run me out. Okay. Now, with all of that said, and by the way, it's more than that. They love me and they love my family deeply. And they are, our family here in Georgia. They're in Georgia. I'm sitting in West Virginia right now. So it's deeper than that. I'm being a little bit, what's the word? Flippant there. But, so I would say, Josh, that, that people seek out affinity when it comes to the people with whom they worship. That's great. The difference that I see, once again, is the active call for people to abandon worship communities where political difference happens in favor of communities where difference doesn't happen. So, that's what concerns me. Okay. The other dynamic, I think, is, you could throw a dart at a church history timeline and find that everywhere. And especially, in places where there is freedom of religion. Of course, people are going to affiliate according to ethnic, according to political, according to age, according to all those sorts of things, right? But, and really, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm realizing you couldn't throw a dart at a church timeline because there was the parish system for centuries, right? But in places where people choose where they go to church, I think that the dynamic changed enough that we need to focus on it, like I said, sometime in the last 15 years.
Yeah, Joe, I'm gonna throw.
But you need to play TJ right now and get this thing moving, Josh.
I can't. I want to.
So
Joe, before I throw it to you, real quick, Joe, real quick. There's still an issue here that I'm trying to get at that I just don't feel like we've quite fully hit. So for me, I'm going to give real life examples because that's just easier for me. I have been to a church where every single week they brought up something about why LGBTQ was wrong and why women shouldn't be leaders. Like they're doing the Bible. They literally did expositional preaching where they took like the book of Romans and somehow every chapter, those two things came up. And I'm like, wait a minute. I don't think that's what Paul was talking about every chapter. Why are these things keep bringing up? And that made me so uncomfortable that I did leave. No one pushed me out. And there were other factors too, but that was a big one. And I find myself at a church where some of their stuff, they're almost so accepting that it makes me uncomfortable, if that makes sense, where they're just so loving to other people that I'm like, okay, wait a minute, there's a line somewhere. But that uncomfortableness is something that is challenging me that I feel like I'm growing at. Whereas the other one, we're just talking about why we hate LGBT community every week. I didn't feel like I was growing. I just felt like I was getting angry every week. like I didn't think that was beneficial to me. Was I wrong for leading over that? Like, is that like where are we at with this? Let's evaluate me. This is now a psychology.
I'm going to resolve this thing I say about. Yeah, I'm going to resolve this. Will be the last thing I say about this, so that you can play TJ and move along. But again, in those times and in those places where people can leave churches and go to other churches, and so largely we're talking about the last 300 years of church history, right? People have left churches. Okay, that dynamic, has its own conversations to have. We've had a lot of those on the Whole Church podcast, right? The dynamic in specific that I'm concerned with here, like I said, is people making the moral claim that you must leave whatever church you're affiliated with unless it is intensely enough devoted to this partisan affiliation or that partisan affiliation. So, if you allow that distinction, that's really what my concern is. It's not that people leave churches. I'm always concerned when people leave churches, but that's not my main concern in this particular conversation.
Yeah. There is room in the dialogue to acknowledge that there are some stereotypes that exist because there has been exposure to the concept, and without an applied counterbalance, that can become what the normative is. And it sounds like in your experience, you experienced a flavor of what some would consider a stereotypical type of example of a hyper-conservative church and that sort of thing. And for better and for worse, we live in a time where there is a buffet of options when it comes to where you choose to worship. And that buffet of options allows for situations where somebody is not growing because of X, Y, or Z reason. And in this case, there's a larger dynamic at play of the issue with what is being preached and things like that, that I think even though the actual material is quote unquote political in nature, I think there has to be a distinction made between political and moral considerations, because a lot of these things get attributed to a particular political stance. But the reality is, I have watched as a whole generation kind of pseudo unified under a what I consider to be a piss poor moral stance, and the ramifications that led to a whole other group of people leaving Christianity and saying, I was just treated like an object for that entire time. I was not considered as a person. And so I think when you start uncovering all of this, you have to consider that there are deeper notes than just, oh, I left my church because of, you know, a particular political affiliation that they had. I think what you and Nathan are talking about in this case are two separate flavors within the ice cream shop, both nonsense, both with their flaws, both with their own garbage toppings, but still two distinct different flavors.
So maybe more of like people in my situation might be wanting to leave churches or talking about hating certain communities every week is more of the moral thing of, hey, I just don't want to be at a place that's filled with so much hate, rather than let's say if the same church, it wasn't every week, it just that happened to be their stance and I didn't like that stance. That would be more of the political idea. And maybe that kind of, is that what the difference looks like that you're talking about?
Well, I'm kind of dipping into material. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead. My bad.
So the only thing that I was going to say was everybody in every single situation. Let me back that up a little bit. Everybody in different situations have bias. It's literally something that's baked into the human existence. We prefer one thing over the other. Now you can call that preference, and to a certain degree it is, but whether it's lighthearted or heavy-handed, whether it has no ramifications on anybody else, or you are slaying people with your opinions, there is biasness in the human being. And when you're talking about these stances of hating this community, being more in line with this point of view, being more in line with that point of view, what you're talking about is a flavor of a bias-driven conversation that considers the stance or the position or the caricature and profile of everything that they pour into that stance before the individual is considered whatsoever. And that's where I think the rubber meets the road on these conversations, is there is this barrier of entry that us as humans struggle with so fundamentally when it comes to laying down our biasness and considering the individual that is there. And Josh, you of all people understand the sick cosmic joke that I am the one that's sitting here preaching this, that I am the one that has jumped on the bandwagon and said, we need to consider other people before the stances and opinions that we happen to have are considered. But here we are. We live in a crazy world. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Nathan, you were about to say something. And then I'm finally going to pull the TJ and move on.
Yes. And I'm kind of dipping into material that I was planning on unveiling later, but, you know, and I think that, you know, Joe's approach that he just narrated is a good approach. The one that I tend to take, and, you know, I mean, it largely comes from exegesis of certain letters of Paul, certain passages that the individual needs to take precedence over, you know, the nation or the community or whatever else. But rather, when we talk about, you know, the agendas of different powers and different parties and different gatherings in the world, the question that I'm always going to come back to is when we ally with this or that power in the world, right? Is it Christ calling the shots, or is Christ being co-opted? All right. Yeah. And a lot of times historically, I mean, those are hard to disentangle because both of them are happening at the same time. But all the same, that's always the question that I'm going to return to. Now I'm going to let you play TJ.
Yeah. All right. So now moving past the first question, we're going to move to the second question. Just kind of getting to the punchline. We said the whole point of this episode is all of us here are kind of the opinion that the church should address, I think we would say, should address political issues in some way. What way that is, I think, is the question at hand, especially when all of our churches, or most of our churches, especially healthy churches, I should say, end up having groups of people who are on both sides of a very polarized political situation here in America right now. And I guess the question is, or at the very least, the churches are in communities where that is their community. You know, you don't find a church in a place that is, this is only Republicans live here or only Democrats live here. Very seldomly anyway. It might exist. I don't know. But just assuming, for the sake of it, that our churches exist in areas that have both Democrats and Republicans, or whatever other political affiliation to wherever you're living, should churches play the both sides and show how both have a point, or like bring up like both, you know, pro-life situation and also what the Bible says about like homosexuality? Like, should the church play both sides, or should the church just kind of avoid anything that could be politics, I guess? Should they be nonpartisan not to offend people, or should they be bipartisan to kind of play both sides, or some other option? Like, how exactly should our churches be handling these political conversations?
I'll jump in. I'll let you play cleanup crew, Nathan. I'll get all the early heat first. So this actually ties in kind of seamlessly to what we were just like the last conversation that we were just having. The reality is that we live in a world where information is freely gotten. Communities can exist outside of geographic location, and we can have subgroupings on platforms that want you to feel like you are in a room full of people, when really it's a small collection of individuals yelling at each other and just trying to see who can yell the loudest. All of those things are true. And this is coming from somebody who my main plot as far as ministry goes right now in the season is digital. So trust me, I am very well aware of the cons, but also the pros of the platform, of the avenue, of this wide open arena that is digital ministry. So I do not want to sound like this is all gloom and doom and has created all of these negative things, because it has created positive things as well. The reality is, you cannot stick your head in the sand anymore. You can, but it's disingenuous. People know what's going on. There is a larger conversation going on that isn't secluded to the physical location that you are in, that like it is at a national or world level or something along those lines. Likewise, there is now more opportunity for individuals within a singular community that is geographically based to communicate and to be more aware of what is going on. So the fundamental reality is that there are things that can and will happen that will affect some communities more than others. That's just the truth of it. We can look back. We don't even need to go back decades and decades and decades. Guys, let's just go back to let's play back the last 4 years and talk about it, and talk about how these different things that have happened affected different communities in different ways. So part of the gig, part of what is involved in pastoring is shepherding the flock that you are called to, loving on those people and being an active presence in their life that is willing to talk to them, engage with them, and to be able to meet them where they're at. That is just the part of the gig. That is part of why pastoring is literally the single hardest thing that I have ever done in my entire life, because it's a people thing. And so I may not be affected by something, but the people that I'm called to are. The people that I am called to care for are affected by a thing. So then what do I do with that? Well, it's part of my job to sit down and talk to people and to allow them an opportunity to be able to engage with the conversation among a community. And that's where it comes back to the people portion of it. People first rather than stances. Yes. Why do we do that? Not because solely for the sake of loving people. We do that also because that is the tone and tenor of relationships that we are called to by Jesus. And so, yes and amen to what you're talking about what are we doing in relation to what are we called to do and who is ultimately calling the shots, who is ultimately in control. Absolutely. It's just two different aspects of the same or similar conversation. But where I attract the heat is, yes, we do need to engage people. Yes, we do need to have those conversations. Should that happen during the worship gathering? Should that happen during the time during Sunday? And I say that tongue in cheek because I, of all people, understand how unconventional the worship gathering can be. So whatever that looks like, should that conversation take place then and there? No, absolutely not. 100%. And that one's one of those. I would be willing to kick that can around and defend that notion, because that's not the thesis statement. The thesis statement of the worship gathering is to do what? Worship. To have to do that aspect of it. Let's say your service is Sunday at 11. Okay, great. Things are done at 12:30. You got a family meeting. Done. We have accomplished what we need to accomplish. We have scheduled what we need to schedule. They are two different things.
So I'm going to push back and then ask this completely unrelated question. First, the pushback is more of I think if you're preaching the Bible as a lot of more of our Protestant churches do, especially your low liturgical churches, and you're going like just through a book of the Bible step at a time. Let's say you're going through Nehemiah. I don't think you can honestly preach Nehemiah and not talk about social justice. Like I think it has to come up.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing
like
with you. So here's the thing though. I'm not one distinction that I, of all people, really need to make, because there is a single, between the three of us right now. One of the phrases that really burns my chops more than anything else, really. I'm not sure that this is a contested number one. Social justice gospel. I can't stand that phrase, because most of the time that I hear it, it is used either out of a defensive posture because they've seen all give no Jesus, or a defensive posture because they're clutching their pearls and wondering about and have been taught, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that it's your own individual responsibility. It's nobody else's responsibility to help you. And so one distinction that I want to make is that what I'm talking about is not devoiding Sunday morning entirely from social justice. What I'm talking about is, if there is a specific political conversation that affects the community, that engages them, that affects their life and mentally, physically, whatever, that's a different thing than allowing the Bible to speak openly and naturally. What you're talking about is, yes, there are certain parts. I would go to Matthew. What you're talking about, instead of going to Nehemiah, I would go to Matthew and say, can you honestly really live this out in the West without having a conversation about caring for the physical well-being of your neighbor and involving those kinds of what would be considered social justice topics? I'm not saying let's not allow that. I'm just saying that if there is a specific political thing, we allow that to be separate from the time of worship and then address that individual thing by itself.
Yeah. I mean, even Calvin's just preach the cross. Well, the cross by itself, that story alone is a story about helping the marginalized. So, I mean, anyway, Joe,
if what you're trying to do is move on, don't bring up John Calvin. That's all I'm saying.
So the question I did want to say, though, because during your speech, you mentioned how certain issues are going to be different from one community to another. Could you give an example of something that's more community based as far as like pastoring?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there could be a topic where okay, so it's where I live, there was a big push that was made to open up a new center for the homeless. One in the city that I live in, and then one in what a lot of locals would consider the sister city. The same lawyer has shut that down over and over and over again. Now, to outside spectators, all of what I just said is a political conversation, and it is. But wrapped up in that political conversation is a conversation about how we should be engaging the homeless and how that affects the lives of the community members here. Another example, the church that ordained me, that the guy that that really helped me hone in. I was coloring outside the lines when it came to pastoral ministry, big time. And this dude came along and was like, "Yo, come here. Let's talk for a while. Let's walk for a while. Let's walk together." And that church is a predominantly Black church in Denver. They also struggle with homelessness, but they also struggle with a lot of racist tones happening among different denominations and different things like that. And so having those kinds of conversations, matters, because you can't ignore the realities of what is going on within the community. But likewise, it's not an opportunity to jump off about every single one of your political stances. Because if where you're going with it is how do we approach this from a Christian worldview, the political part of the conversation really only takes up a small piece of real estate within the larger paradigm of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, Nathan, finally throwing it to you. The question at hand, we're looking at, should the church be nonpartisan or bipartisan? Just kind of like a church that exists in the society that we exist in, that's run by a two-party system where everyone's so polarized in our community. How does the church address their communities in the situation we find ourselves in?
First thing I'd want to say is that we got to remember that the parties are not unified organisms. All right. So, I mean, on election day, whatever day in November that is, every other year for me, because I vote in midterm elections, or every 4 years if you only vote in the general elections, that's also fine. What the DNC and what the RNC want is for you to click on the screen in the proper box, hit the finish ballot button, put your ballot, through the scanner machine, go home, and then come back 2 years later and do it again. They are only interested in you every 2 years. What I'm more concerned with, and this really is where my concern is what we're going to call the entertainment companies. And, these are cable news stations. These are online outlets. These are, in some cases, paper publications, although those are becoming more and more rare. But these are the ones to occupy our attention and want to occupy our loyalty and want to occupy our passions every day from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, mainly for the sake of selling ads. Okay. And so, this is one of the places where, before I was probably sounding like, I wanted people to get away from politics. No, absolutely not. Every 2 years, if I see you at the polling place, I'm going to wave to you. I'm going to smile at you. I'm going to be glad you're casting your vote. Every day in between those Novembers on even numbered years, I want people to be involved in politics in a broader sense, in what I call an Aristotelian sense. All right. Aristotle in the 4th century BC, that human beings are by nature political animals or animals of the community. Okay. I want people to be involved and be involved passionately and be involved thoroughly and be involved consistently in communities where human scale things are going on and they have responsibility for their decisions, and the thing they do actually affect, not infect, although sometimes that happens too in the season, but actually affect the people around them. Okay. Now, some of the places where that absolutely does not happen is on the couch in front of a cable news station. Where that happens, but in almost entirely poisonous ways, is when we are, hurling insults at each other on, whatever social media platform is regnant at the time. Okay. What I'm interested in is the politics of your workplace, the politics of your neighborhood, the politics of your community, the politics of your local worship gathering. All right. So in that respect, you could say that I'm actually calling for a much more political Christian life. It's just that, what people think is political usually isn't. And that kind of stinks.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm made to think of, I think it was John Wesley. I could be wrong. But whenever he was defining what it means to be made in the image of God, saying that it's that we relate to God uniquely. And the ways that he said we related to God was naturally, spiritually, and politically. And I do think that's the thing, like how we do our systems, whether they're in the church or in our government, whatever, we have the ability to relate to God in how we structure our systems. Are we going to care for the marginalized and the needy? Are we going to uplift the powerful and the wealthy already? How we do these things in a way is how we are able to relate to God. One of many ways, I would
Right.
say. Probably
And,
not
and,
3 or
and what
4 like he
Aristotle
said.
recognized, again, back in the 4th century BC, is that every human being is involved not in a community, but in communities. And so for Aristotle, being a good Athenian as he was, the polis was the truly political place because in that, what he calls a community of communities, right? This is where your family and your temple and your guild, if you're a professional person, and your demos, and that's the subdivision within Athens where you would vote for things. All of those things come together in the polis, right? So, when I say that the Christian life should be political, what I'm imagining is, and this is where my congregationalist roots are showing, is that in your local worship gathering, that should be the place where all of your communities come with you. All right. If you're a Republican, great. If you are an engineer, great. If you are a feminist, great. Whatever communities you bring with you, you come there with the understanding that it's always going to be possible for the authority of Christ to say, in the name of Christ, we're going to have to put a check on this other community. Okay. And so once again, the dynamic that most concerns me, and Josh, your examples that you keep bringing up, are examples of what happens when this goes haywire. When a certain what I'm going to call partisan rather than political, because it has to do with one of the two major parties. But when a partisan concern comes to take the reins and basically to tell Christ, you're going to talk about this every week because I told you to. Okay. That's the dynamic that concerns me. Okay. Again, it's not that people belong to a plurality of communities. Like I said, Aristotle probably never met a Judean in his life, but he knew that people are part of plural communities, right? Among Jesus's disciples, you have a zealot, you have a lestes, you have a tax collector and a telones. That's the Greek word. I know I'm doing my Greek flex right now. I'm sorry about that. But, you have all of these figures who, in the first century Roman occupied Palestinian world, wanted to claim absolute authority, right? If you were telones, if you were a tax collector, your chief authority, your chief loyalty was supposed to be to the Roman Empire. If you were a Herodian, your chief loyalty was supposed to be to the royal family of the Herods. If you were a Sadducee, your chief loyalty was supposed to be to the temple authorities, right? What Jesus does is he brings people from all of these circles together, travels with them, gives his secret teachings to them, and, sends them out telling them that there is truly a King of Kings, but he's not in Persia, and he's sure as heck not in Rome, but I am. Okay. And I mean, for that reason, Jesus is always supremely political. And that's the problem. It's when Jesus stops being supremely political and becomes merely a cheerleader for some other supreme politics.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot, especially as here we have a teacher from the Nazarene tradition, a kitchen manager from the Lutheran tradition now, and a home church pastor coming together, hopefully under the authority of Jesus, to say, hey, our partisan stuff kind of isn't the most important thing, maybe.
And when it becomes demonic. I'm going to go that far and say that when one of the parties is calling the shots, it has become a demonic power.
Which is recollective. Of course, I'm obligated to mention C.S. Lewis. When he writes about the four loves, he talks about how once it becomes a god, it becomes a demon. And if that's true of romance and friendship, how much more true is it of Republican Party or Democrat Party?
So I'm gonna save you probably about 10 minutes worth of editing time and say I fundamentally misunderstood the original question. So you can go ahead and cut the last diatribe that I went on. Feel free.
Or Joe, I might have just misrepresented you.
But the way you answered, I got what you were asking. I thought you were asking something different than that. That's why I gave the answer that I did. But essentially, I would agree. I think there's too much legwork to be done before we start redefining what politics means for people. Just personally, I am of that. Because of the people, I'm 100% biased, 100%, because the people that I care for tend to be the de-churched. And when you go and start redefining those things, you're already fighting an uphill battle. And when you're talking about these groups that already struggle one way or the other with all of this, I think nailing the root and then using that root as the springboard to then say, hey, here's what we mean when we say things like Jesus is supremely political. That's what we mean. I totally get the homework. Like you guys have done a wonderful job of showing your work on how you got from point A to point B. That's not the problem. The problem is that if you are entering a larger context of this conversation, generally there's a lot of points along the way of what you guys said that are off ramps for people that will not hear the rest of the conversation because they don't dig what you did as far as trying to give a different context for something or other along the way. And so that's why for me, I go to that place of, okay, before we even get into how you view the stances, how do you view the individual that's sitting across the way from you? And what if at the end of the conversation, when all the dust is settled, nobody has changed their mind? Do you still see that as a productive conversation? And I say all of that tongue in cheek because of the platform that we're on. But the reality is, I think that's the first conversation to have before stating, yeah, okay, so just because you believe this thing, now let's talk about we've talked about the people. Yeah, sure. Let's talk about the stance and say, okay, just because you believe in these things and other people don't, doesn't mean that you no longer can be in community with them. Because I agree about the multiplicity of community that every single human being lives in, that every single person, whether they realize it or not, craves. It's just the reality. Every single solitary person walking God's green earth has a deep desire to have a sense of belonging. That has happened with mankind for time immemorial. And so, sure, then we talk about this conversation of, it does not disqualify this entire community if some of you think about something one way and some of you think about it the other way, with the giant asterisk of the details of the situation, you know?
Well, and the asterisk for me would not be the details, although the details are important. I'm going to grant that. The asterisk would be in the name of whose authority, right? So, I mean, again, I mean, if you want to go back, 2,000 years, I mean, we can talk about, First John saying that those who say we're going to offer you knowledge that takes you beyond Christ, don't associate with those people, right?
Yeah.
But that's in the name of Christ. Or if you want to just go 100 years ago and, the Barmen Declaration in Switzerland saying, those who, claim that the supreme authority is the National Sociologist, wow, paging Dr. Freud, the National Socialist Party, there we go, is the ultimate authority. Those people have nothing to do with Christ. That's still in the name of Christ, okay? Where I'm going to jump off is when people say, we're fine with the Jesus stuff just as long as it doesn't cross the bounds that the party lays down. Right.
Yep.
So again, I mean, I think, Joe, that you and I are going to land a lot of the same places. We're just approaching the runway from different directions, which is why we keep bumping noses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like if I go on to another rant, Josh is going to hit the gong and bring out the big hook. Yes, I definitely just dated myself, so I was trying to shorthand. But yes, absolutely, I agree with you with what you just said.
That's more my generation, Joe.
We've almost made it through the opening questions, but no, I did want to say though to Joe's point, and then move on so that we can do the roundup as we start to get to the deeper stuff after that. No, me personally, I had a friend in college who, when we met, I was Pentecostal, strong, super, very conservative Christian, white evangelical. That is who I was. All the stereotypes you're thinking of, they're correct, except for the snake handling bit. All the rest is right. He was atheist, liberal, progressive, who wasn't quite sure about the church thing. And I think he'd be okay with me saying pretty much most of the stereotypes you thought of like how science is God and Democrats are great. Yeah, yeah, he fit the mark, right? And every day, for the most part, we would walk to the other side of the campus to get lunch together or dinner or whatever. And we had these long conversations. Then at the end of it, no one changed their mind. And here we are. That was, let's see, 2010-ish. Here we are 14 years later. We're both a lot closer to the middle. I don't believe in the God that I believed in at that time. Same name, same Bible. But I realized that my thoughts of God were just so off. My thoughts of the Bible were just so wrong. Some of that was because of our conversations. over years, over a decade.
Mhm.
You know, and for him, you know, he would now probably call himself an agnostic. He's not a Christian. He doesn't consider himself liberal anymore. I don't consider myself conservative anymore. And I think that's a lot of the heart of it is you can't start at the, hey, Christ is supreme, so believe this about Jesus and all the other stuff, fall in line. I get where Joe's coming from. Like, that is true. We start with these normal conversations and we just kind of figure out where each of us believe, and we push each other and we push each other. And as we develop relationships that take years, maybe eventually we'll see a little bit of growth both on our end and on the other end. You know, I don't think you can go to a relationship expecting only to change the other person and nothing to happen to yourself, because that's not how relationships work. Otherwise, yeah, you're kind of being dishonest about the relationship, personally. Anyway, so with that, we'll do that roundtable roundup thing. We're going to go through a list of questions. Each of us can answer one of the questions and only one of the questions. No one is allowed to respond to the question until after the roundup is complete. And since there's 3 of us and 4 roundup questions, we will not answer all of the questions. One of them, at least, won't be answered. Maybe multiple of them. We might all 3 pick the same question, in which case 3 of them won't be answered. So let's see what happens. I'm going to read off the questions, and then I'm going to go. Here are the 4 questions. Remember, when you answer the question, you have to 1. Should the church stay out of polarizing debates in order to improve the church? 2. How do we disciple others with political views? 3. The churches and voting boxes. 4. Are there ever times when Joe, 4, which one would be the most likely to handle?
So I lost your audio when you started playing the music in the background. I lost you entirely.
All right, I will do the 4 questions again for you.
Okay, now I can hear you. When you first turn on your backing track, it cuts out.
Okay. Number 1 was, should the church stay out of polarizing debates to protect unity within the church? Number 2 was, how do we disciple others who may have political views that we find disturbing? Number 3 was, should churches have voting boxes or places to register to vote in them? And number 4 was, are there ever times that one political party is closer to the heart of God than another? So, do you have one of those you would most like to handle?
Yes. For as much as I think the bit that would ensue with me from me answering the third one would be hilarious, I'm gonna go with the more helpful one and go with the first one.
So should churches stay out of polarizing debates in order to protect unity? Yeah.
Correct. I think you are actually damaging unity when you completely stick your head in the sand. The reality is, when we look at the Christian experience, it is an embodied life. It is a wholesale, complete and total relationship. And yes, within that conversation, and this may tickle the brains of some people that are listening because they might not like the language that I will use, but within this, yes, we do need to consider the lordship of Christ in the larger conversation. And I think you leave something on the table when you don't address the reality of the human experience. And so, and thus avoid a hard or difficult or complicated or controversial conversation or line of dialogue that, yes, sometimes can veer into addressing a political conversation. And I could see a world where the extremity of what I said, as far as the not like always leaving that for after quote unquote Sunday morning, I could see a world where over time I come off of that stance, and maybe if you ask me again in another 5 years, maybe I have chilled out maybe even a little bit more. But even in not bringing it up during the worship gathering, there's still this desperate need to address things. So unequivocally, no, like that's not, we need to learn to be able to engage these things well, not just hide from them entirely, because you don't know what happens when you have somebody who's just exposed to a group of people who can convey a concept, not angry or waving their hands above their head or like going to an extreme worldview, and just be able to talk these things out and create a haven of understanding where that person can then take that and go forward whichever direction that they're going to go. You don't get all of that if you just stick your head in the sand.
Yeah. All right, Nathan, do you know which of these four you would most like to answer?
Yeah, I'm going to take letter D. Are there ever times one political party is closer to the heart of God than another? And the answer is yes. And the discipleship process, so I'm going to kind of roll B into this too. So Josh, if you want to take B or D, I'm going to have 1 foot in each of them. The discipleship process, I think, is as Joe rightly noted, the long process, the relationship process, the talking with each other and having conversations that don't get resolved in one sitting process of figuring out, all of the places where without our knowledge or with our knowledge, the party is calling the shots, and all of those places where we need to repent of that. So, if a party is closer to the heart of God, where we need to start is not with the party's platform, but with the heart of God. And, in that respect, we need to pose questions not only of the ends, in other words, what is our goal with this policy, but also with the means, and also with the human involvement, and also with the unintended consequences, and also with the principles of, political philosophy that are involved. And in all of those complicated ways that, living in a community of communities, I'm going to go back to Aristotle here, always involves us. All right. So absolutely, there are times when this political party on this question is closer to the heart of God for these theological reasons. And then there are also times when this party on this question for this reason are taking a stand against God, in rebellion against God, for these theological reasons.
I like it. For myself, then, I'm gonna go with C, or 3. Should churches have voting boxes or places to register to vote in them? Sometimes, maybe, I guess, is my answer. And not for the reasons you think. For me personally, I think if the church is one that is constantly espouting, one side of the politics, whichever partisan it is, each sermon, and they're in a community that has really easy access to voting anyway, and then they have voting boxes, it kind of feels like they're just trying to pressure people into voting the way they want them to vote. And I think that's really inappropriate. But I also can imagine there's places and times and areas where churches find themselves in areas where it's really hard for the marginalized there to get to a voting box in time. Maybe they have to travel to an area at a certain time of day that it's hard for them to make it, or maybe it's difficult for them to figure out how to register to vote, or they're unsure how to register to vote. And if your church is in a community such as that, I can find a place where it's appropriate, not because you're trying to push the politics, but rather because you're trying to help bring power to the marginalized. And I do think that's the church's job. So I guess it kind of depends on your context. And I feel like I sound like Joe earlier in the episode now, but there you are. That's how I would answer that. So now with the round table adjourned, the round table roundup adjourned, round table still here, sort of very small round table. Anybody have anything they want to respond to that was said during the roundup? I think I'm good personally.
Yeah, I think Joe is right on target there. I mean, when he says that, to say that certain questions are out of bounds when we gather as a worshiping community, is to say that Christ is Lord in everywhere except for these places. And that just strikes me as a bad idea, theologically speaking. Now, I realize in saying that, I'm paraphrasing, the great neo-Calvinist Abraham Kuyper. But, despite Joe's distaste for Calvin that he voiced earlier, I'm gonna risk quoting a neo-Calvinist there.
I love it.
It's fine. Everybody's allowed a lapse of judgment from now and then. The only thing that I really wanted to say was, if we could see a world, if we could see a church, and who knows, maybe somebody listening has an example that fits the bill. Cool, awesome, aces. But if we could see a church that could leverage that could actually wield the responsibility of having some kind of system in place where they could accept votes and ballots from folks and not have that taint the waters at all, and not have that become a problem at all, or create some kind of division or something along those lines within the church, that would be a beautiful, beautiful sight. Do I think it's possible? Depends on when you ask me. But I can certainly tell you that I would be surprised if I watched a church. I would be pleasantly surprised if I watched a church be able to wield that well, because that's a lot of responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's funny is, just given my answer, I think it's funny, the anecdote I'm about to provide. My parents' church has voting booths whenever voting happens, and I think I am the one that has the biggest problem out of that of everyone, it seems like.
Yeah.
But that different situation than what I was describing with the marginalized there earlier. So before we do God moments or wrap up or anything, I think the big question that I want to leave us with concerning this topic, in our country, in our times now, it's like an identity thing. It's like we draw the lines, not even at church, just amongst friends. It's like, I can't be friends with someone who's pro-Palestine, or I can't be friends with someone who likes Israel, or I can't be friends with someone who thinks Donald Trump, or, like this is where the lines are drawn in our country right now. Not just with churches, even with friends, with family. People don't even want to talk to their own family members over some of this stuff. I guess the question is just kind of, how do we, like, I know that's like, it's dumb. I don't have like a super great way of answering this, but like, how do we keep from losing ourselves? I guess that's really the question.
And Joe, I'll take the first swing at this, and I'll offend people first, and then you can offend people after me this time. But I think that discipleship, and you work that word into one of your questions, really is the site where this happens. So I mean, you're right. To formulate the proper relationship between political parties and the entertainment industry and the worship gathering and the global church and the soul and Christ and all these sorts of things isn't something you can do in a sentence or even in a series of very tightly worded sentences. It's something that emerges in practices. And that's one of the reasons, not the supreme reason, but one of the reasons why a worship gathering is so important, because we are being discipled every time we gather to worship. All right. Whether that is hearing the scriptures proclaimed, whether that is singing songs of praise and lament, whether that is confessing our sins, whatever it is that we are doing, Christ is forming us in that worship gathering so that we can be ambassadors in a world that does not know Christ. And, that is something that doesn't come easy. It doesn't come naturally. And, it is that long process of discipleship that even makes it possible. So, one of the things that I want to be sure that I'm clear on is that what I've said today, even though I've done a lot of talking, I'll grant that, the things that I've said today are second order commentary on the important things that happen when believers gather to worship. That is where we are visibly present as the body of Christ. That's where we are discipled so that we can be witnesses to the gospel of Christ. And that's the place, to pick up on Joe's conversation earlier, which I hope you do not edit out because it's really good stuff. That's the place where we learn what social justice is. And once again, I want to be real clear. it's not social justice that concerns me. If anything, I think we should talk more about social justice in our worship gatherings. What concerns me is when some power other than Christ calls the shots and says, this is a social justice issue. It just happens to coincide with all of the planks of the DNC platform, but it's a social justice issue. So you have to do this. And if not, then you care about your conservatism more than you care about Christ. Okay. That makes me nervous. I'm not saying that it's always wrong. I'm not saying in any given case that it's wrong. I will say that it makes me nervous because it makes me feel like they've got something hidden up their sleeve.
Yeah. Joe, you have anything with that?
Yeah. While I may shy away from some of the language that was used or some of the specifics, I would agree largely that when you have a collection of people, that is a discipling moment for better and for worse, depending on the situation. And the way that you experience these things does a lot to inform how you process those things. The old adage is hurt people hurt people. And so when you're trying to figure out where to pick up the ball and run as far as this whole thing goes, it really does matter with that you recognize the nuance and the large scale of what it is that you're talking about, because what you're talking about are things that affect the physical existence of believers, things that affect the world around, with it, whether it is in the direct orbit of the individual at a small c community sense, or the world of the believer because of something that is a wider net, a larger thing that affects a large group of people. That individual just happens to be a part of that larger C community. Engaging there and walking with people is the difference maker. Engaging people at a level of where they are operating and being willing to walk with them and have conversations on the way to dinner, have conversations that kick these cans around, really investigate and interrogate and break down what you believe and why you believe it, and be willing to walk in a means that says two people are walking into this. And we are going to be shaped by this conversation. We are going to do life with each other, not try to make a clone of ourselves or make a convert out of that person into my way of thinking or my party's way of thinking or this group's way of thinking. If we can achieve that, if we can walk with people, if we can do life with each other, we're not going to change the world. But what we are going to do is create small environments that allow for the heart and character of God to be vibrantly on display.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
and I'm absolutely Joe's amen pew here. And Joe's wondering who in the world brought a pew into his house church.
So as we start doing these things, we start having these walks and talks and discipling people well around politics. Nathan, what do you think we'll see start to change around us?
Well, one of the changes that I try to affect, and I mean, and it goes right back to the phrase that was towards the end of what Joe said there, is that the church is a gathering on display. And, you know, one of the things that I think that the entertainment industry does that is so poisonous is it limits the range of human possibility. You know, the raving mob and the angry mob are really, I mean, two of the only possibilities that industry even allows human beings to take part of. And, you know, what a church can do, Not what a church always does, not what historically the church has been super awesome at doing, but what a church can do. In the structure of a church, in the calling of the church, in the inspiration of the church, what a church might possibly do is to open up possibilities that that entertainment industry closes off for human beings. And, for that reason, one place where I'm going to tweak Joe's nose just a little bit, because I do love tweaking Joe's nose, is that, I think that I do want to make converts, because in the case of people who have been discipled by cable news and by online shoutfests, there is a better way of life that's possible. And I want to invite people into that. And, historically, the word for that invitation is conversion. So, in that respect, I absolutely want to convert it. Now, I know full well that's not what Joe was talking about. But, misrepresenting Joe, that's part of what's so fun about this podcast.
Yeah, really. Sometimes we've considered renaming ourselves from the Whole Church Podcast to the Strawman Argument Podcast. But with that, I do want to go ahead and move on to our God Moment segment, where we just share a moment we've seen God in recently. Blessing, challenge, whatever that may be. And TJ likes to make me go first, and I had a good one, and I can't remember what it is. So I'm thinking.
I'll go first.
Okay. TJ will never know that you went first. He never looks.
Yeah, so one challenge that is in front of me right now is that in terms of my teaching, and listeners who have heard me on this and other podcasts know that I recently went from being a college professor for many years to being a high school English teacher. And part of that switch is getting licensed in the state of Georgia to teach in public schools. I've got a provisional license right now. I'm working towards what they call my renewable license. And one of the things that involves is going through a hundreds of hours training sequence so that I can learn how to teach 17-year-olds after I've spent 23 years of my life teaching 18-year-olds. And oh man, if I didn't know before that my humility was lacking, I know now that my humility is lacking, because the resentment, I can actually taste it on the back of my tongue when I sit through these workshops. And, I am repenting for it every minute, and it's still there. So, that is one of those places, if I didn't believe before that only God could redeem our souls, every workshop that I sit through, it's made very painfully evident to me.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and go next, because I did remember what mine was. It's a weirder one, so hopefully it won't take me too long to go through this. So for those who don't know, and if you've heard systematic ecology enough, you probably do know, I like Taylor Swift a lot. I like her music. I think it's fun. And part of what I enjoy is her breakup songs, because even though it's been a long time since I've been in that situation, I'm still able to relate on that level. And I'm like, yeah, that person sucks. Oh yeah, getting angry. And I'm like, this is fun. And it's something that you can relate to, and it's therapeutic in a way. And recently, one of my actual favorite bands, Taylor Swift does not mark my favorites list, but I like her. One of my actual favorite bands, Judah and the Lion, releases an album, and it's post his divorce. And my brain is, this is Judah and the Lion going to do the Taylor Swift thing. And we're going to be like, oh yeah, exes suck. And instead, it's a 5-part album about the stages of grief and what it looks like to completely heal. And I'm like, oh shoot, this is actually what in-depth process thinking is, and what it looks like when someone actually has emotional depth to their lyrics. I love Taylor Swift still, but man, he goes through and come near the end of the album, I get challenged. Judah and the Lion is one of those, I don't know how to word it. They are Christians. They are a band. I don't think you can call them a Christian band just because they don't use the word Jesus, and a lot of their songs are explicit. And yet you get near the end of this album, and he's singing about the long, dark night of the soul. And he talks about how his wife cheated on him, and he went through all this stuff, and how now he's at a point where he's found healing in the pain and the suffering, and he truly wishes her the best, and goes on a list of how he wants better for her and what he thinks she can have in her life. And you're like, holy crap, I'm not that Christian. Like, for me, like, I'm listening to this going, I got some work to do, because I don't think I'm at a point in my life where if I went through the stuff he went through that I could say that. And I'm just like, yeah, that was a challenge. And I won't lie, my eyes got a little sweaty some parts of that album. It was good stuff. Especially there's a line that he's like, you find life 6 feet under, and I'm like, oh no. Anyway, Joe.
I don't know how you simultaneously were able to expertly weave together one of the single most atrocious opinions that I have ever heard come out of your mouth. And then go on this. Oh, your speech. Oh, you talk, and then you just needle just a little bit. Just, hey, I'm going to make this comment about Christian music, and then I'm just going to expect you to keep on rolling, so that way you don't completely and totally derail the entire thing. But I'm the problem in these situations. I'm the long-winded one. Anyway, that was the level of expertise that you were able to just pull off was astounding. Anyway,
I apologize.
So my God moment is kind of one that is still progressing. In a couple of months ago, I became a statistic in certain ways, and left a pastoral position in less than favorable terms, we'll say. And it was very much a me. It would have been, it's the perfect on-ramp for me to get cynical, for me to get angry, for me to reinforce all of the stereotypes that I had in my head previously about the Sunday morning model and all of those kinds of things. But what it did, like, I knew enough to not go down that road, but what it did was it started to call into question what my identity was as a pastor and what that meant for the future of me as a pastor, and the things that I like in struggling with my seat at the table. And do I have anything? Should I even bother? Is this even like am I actually called and qualified, and all of those kinds of things. And it's by no means a situation that has really like come to a full and complete circle, but I can tell that there are reaffirmations of the identity that I have in Christ coming from ways that, when you compare dollars to donuts, are the effect that I'm having consistently in the lives of people that I'm having the effect in, that they're not like, it's not pastoral in the purest sense. It's outside of the paradigms of what people would consider pastoral, my pastoral ministry. But anybody who's a pastor understands you don't turn that thing off at 5 o'clock. You don't stop being a pastor at 5 o'clock. And so it extends out from there, and that outside of the paradigm, separated from where I'm having the questions or where I'm starting to see the evidence of time served, loving and caring and doing and all of that sort of stuff that helped to remind me about what actually I am called to do. And I'm affecting the lives of people that it means to say that it means the world to me. And these are some of the most precious souls on this planet to me is really, really special.
Man, praise God. I'm glad I didn't follow that one up. Well, guys, again, doing TJ's parts, I struggle, but if you liked this, if you enjoyed some aspect of our rants today, please consider sharing it with a friend, family member, enemy, cousin. I know cousins, one of the things I'm supposed to say, because cousins are important. Share it with a cousin.
I love that some bits on this show don't die.
Yeah, never die. Also, make sure to go over to our store where you can get comfy t-shirts like this one to represent the podcast. And there's other ones that don't explicitly say the podcast, but have something about church unity, one church, loving each other kind of stuff. If you just kind of want to represent unity, you could do that too. And yeah, I think the next one's my line. I'm used to saying this line. So also check out the other Angel Ministry Podcast Network shows. We mentioned a few earlier. I mentioned a few more. Brandon Knight, he does My Seminary Life. Go check that one out. What have I not mentioned? The homily, Will Rose. If you want to hear some of his sermons, you can hear that over there as well. So we hope you enjoyed this show. Next week, we'll be joined by Brandon Knight of My Seminary Life and Nick Polk of Tolkien Pop. Ironically, my co-host should also be there. So next week, that's not a roundtable, might have more people on than a roundtable discussion did. To discuss, of course, the most Christian topic of all, Johnny Cash. He has a new album coming out. We're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about some other post-mortem works, looking at C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and whether or not some stuff in the Bible may have been published post-mortem. Looking at you, Moses. So join us for that. After that, we're going to have Pastor Derek of the Sanctuary Church in Alaska joining us. Then we will have on Kester Bruin to discuss his books. He has a book on pirates we're going to talk about, a book on AI we're going to talk about, and of course, we're going to talk about the church. So pirates, AI, and the church all together should be a fun episode. And finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will be on as soon as someone tells him, because he doesn't know, because this is one of those ongoing bits that Joe loves. Someone please tell Francis Chan so we could stop this one, though. He needs to know. This is getting old. Y'all gotta do something. All right. Later, guys.